morning, good afternoon to wherever you are, and welcome to the webinar. Our discussion today is on behavior management among children. But why is this topic important? Well, last night as I was preparing for this webinar, my 22-month-old daughter had this urge of listening to her favorite nursery rhyme on my laptop. Not on the TV, not on a phone, but on my laptop. And stories, and nothing would dissuade her from doing so. I tried everything I could to get her off, but nothing would matter to her other than being on my laptop. And I'm sure all our listeners today and wherever you are have had numerous such stories and would love to understand how to manage and mold a child's behavior. And that's the objective of our session today. And I'm thrilled to be joined by two experts today who will shed some light, building on their decades of experience of working with parents and young children across the world. I'll start with a short introduction. I'm very conscious that 30 seconds of introduction will not do justice to everyone, but I'll do my best to bring out a couple of core items. Our first panelist today is Jan Dubel. Jan is an internationally recognized as a specialist in early childhood education. Having trained as an early year specialist, Jan has worked in schools across the UK and globally, leading teams as an early years coordinator. Jan has also been instrumental in the management of earlier foundation stage framework for the UK. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Jan. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And our second panelist today is Dr. Indrajit, or Indy as we lovingly call him. Indy has worked in the pediatrics for the past 30 years. And for the past 18 years, Indy has been a consulting pediatrician at the York Teaching Hospital NHS Foundation Trust in the UK. He specializes in managing children with conditions such as autism, cerebral palsy, and other behavior and sleep challenges. Glad to have you with us as well, Indy.
Thank you.
I'll dig straight in. Conscious we have a packed agenda, and I'll probably start with you first, Jan. Jan, it's often said that children can become the center of their parents' universe. What are your thoughts about this, and what role do parents' personalities play in molding a child's behavior?
Well, I think it's inevitable to start with that a child is the center of a parent's universe. I think that's a natural, instinctive human intuition. But it's quite interesting because we are going to talk about behavior management, and that's quite a broad term that covers quite a lot of things. But in sort of thinking about how we refine that down, I would say there's the three main elements of what a parent does in this kind of area. One of the fundamental things that you do as a parent is you enculturate and reflect values on your child. And you do that all the time, subconsciously, through every action, every word. Everything you do is a reflection of what you believe is important. And children pick up on that. They're programmed to do that. 99% of what you do is learned behavior, and much of it children do by copying and emulating and taking messages from the people around them. So part of what you do as a parent is you demonstrate what is important, but in the area of behaviour, you start demonstrating what is appropriate behaviour, and that can differ culturally. It can differ through different families. It can differ in different countries and different ages and so on. So fundamentally, you're reflecting how to be, and part of how you are is how you behave. And how you behave in different social contexts or individual contexts, how you treat people, how you deal with things, and so on. Within that, to be more technical, I would say there are two specific elements which are critically important. One is the idea of self-regulation. And self-regulation is being able to manage your own behavior, managing your instincts, your impulses, which are very strong in very young children, and learning how to develop strategies of dealing with the immediacy of life. Very young children live in the immediate, and part of maturation, part of growing up, is you see beyond the immediate. So this idea of self-regulation, and sometimes called co-regulation with very young children, is scaffolding their behavior and giving them strategies to deal with situations that they find challenging. An element of that also is what I would describe as emotional literacy. And emotional literacy is, as it says, the ability to recognize, name, and understand particular emotions. And emotions in children, and in some adults, but certainly in children, are very, very strong and very, very intense. So knowing what fear feels like, knowing what jealousy feels like, knowing what frustration feels like, knowing what anger feels like, being able to name that as anger, and that it's okay to feel emotions, but then to develop strategies of saying, well, when you're angry, when I'm angry, these are things you can do. When I'm frustrated, these are things you can do. As children get older, they build up a well of those experiences. And so the strategy, the way of dealing with it, becomes almost second nature. But certainly in their very earliest years, part of the role of parents is to support and scaffold that.
That's really interesting. Self-regulation is a term that'll stay with me. I keep reminding myself how I should not be expressing similar behaviors as my daughter is, but that's important. Let's dig deeper. Yeah, and just sticking with you for a moment. How would you easily explain behavior management to a parent? It's a vast space. It can be very scientific, very detailed. So how would you simplify the whole idea of behavior management for the people listening in?
Well, it's interesting you said that, because yes, it is very scientific, and there's a lot of neuroscience and research around how we support children's behaviour and support their growth. Um, but also, I think alongside, in parallel to that, a lot of the things that we do as parents are very instinctive and very intuitive, and very built on our own experiences of being parented. So I think it's important to say that we can sometimes overthink this, and actually some of those instincts are often the right ones, and doing what feels right sometimes is the best thing to do. So I think the way I would describe behaviour management, and that is actually, in some contexts, that is a contested term, but it's about how we enable and support children to manage their own behaviour and to do what's appropriate, to understand the behaviour of people around them, how you interact with other people, how you interact with your parents, how you interact with your siblings, how you manage those kind of immediate emotions, and how that fits in with the world around them. So behaviour management is ultimately about evolving strategies for the child to use, so that behaviour is dependent on themselves rather than on extrinsic or outward things. So it's supporting a child's understanding and management of their own behaviour, I think, is a really important a place to start.
That's thank you for the clarity and simplifying the concept. Supporting the child in helping them understand their own behavior is what I would take away as a simple definition. Coming to you, Indy, you have spent a lifetime as a doctor advising parents on behavior among children. A specific area of interest is, of course, food habits, eating habits, which parents start correcting, if I may use the word, from a very young age in their parents. Is it true that eating habits also demonstrate behavior traits? And is managing those eating habits another form of behavior management?
Just to start off, I'd like to clarify that my interest in eating habits is in young children, not
Yeah.
anorexia and bulimia in the older children. And I very early recognized the link between behavior and eating. Yeah? Because in some cultures, it's almost like it's something that you enjoy and it's like an occasion, and in others, it's just done as a routine. So lots of issues that you see that are evolving around the eating can be seen across the board with other behavior issues as well. Where the child is trying to test the parents. They want to see how far can I go before mom and dad give in and give me something else to eat that I want, and things like that. So I think, as you can imagine, each child is different, and the way they behave around eating is different. So the most important thing for parents is to mold their behavior in keeping with the child's, the traits that they are showing. There is, I think University College London did a study and did say that there is a link between, little children having, issues with their eating habits and later onset of eating disorders. Like, there is a link that if you overeat when you're older, there is a risk that you might develop bulimia. And obviously, if you don't eat enough, then there is a risk that, there is a risk. It's not necessary, it's just a risk, that you could develop anorexia later on in life.
All right, that's useful. So it's what I'm taking away is it's an area their parents should keep an eye out for, but there's nothing to be really concerned about till the time the child is eating healthy and they're following the food patterns that make sense for them, where they are, which country they are, what religion they follow. It's contextual, so that's great.
Mhm.
If I was just to open a question to both of you as a panelist, so we've spoken about um, behavior management, the concept, eating is one part. What is the other big area that you see a lot of research happening on behavior management? Just opening it to both Jan and Indy.
Go ahead, Jan.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's you talked about the link there between eating and behaviour. I think there's also a very strong link between language development and behaviour management, because often in cases where children might, for example, throw a tantrum or get very angry or irate, very often that's due to the gap between their understanding and their ability to articulate and to describe their needs or their wants, or, as I talked about before, emotional literacy. So the development of language and supporting effective language and bilingualism alongside that is a very strong thread in both early childhood development and particularly in research. And I think over recent years, particularly the sort of undeniable link between development and language, things like vocabulary size, things like, although that's contested, but there is a role for it, things like understand the protocols of language, like serve and return, being able to negotiate, being able to describe wants and needs, being able to compromise. They're all dependent on having a rich, strong lexicon of language to describe it. So I think that these are themes that we will continue to follow. And I know in the last webinar, I talked about the role of language in terms of how you use it to locate and process memory. So that's certainly something that I would throw in again, and particularly within the context of the term emotional literacy, being able to describe that is really important. The other thing, and it's quite interesting, we've talked about self-regulation already. Sometimes in behavior management, it is almost the adults being able to self-regulate their own behavior. And what I mean by that is sometimes it can be really easy to give in to an immediate demand. But the more we do that as parents, sometimes that builds up, makes it more difficult in terms of moving forward. So having very clear boundaries, being consistent, and being clear, however hard, and parenting is desperately difficult, very the most challenging job you'll do, and it's exhausting. And sometimes, yes, it's easier to give in, and obviously we all do that. But understanding that actually, the stronger we are, and the more self-regulated we are as parents, the clearer those behavioural paths will be, and the clearer the child will understand that process of their own behaviour management. Yeah,
and we'll probably dig into self-regulation a bit later down. Indy, any other fields of research that you'd want to call out? We've heard of language, we've heard of food. Anything else that stands out for you?
In terms of research, I think most of it is kind of around the known, developmental disorders in children. Like, I think the one that takes most of the time is management of autism, and to try and understand the genetics of it and how to manage it, despite, not only with sort of medication, but how to alter behavior. And I think so. It's with the developmental disorders where most of the research is based. Going back to what Jan said, I realized very early on in my training, there's two things I realized: that behavior and emotional health does impact on a child's physical health. Like, for example, if you have a 4-year-old child who gets admitted to hospital with a pneumonia, that child might interpret it that I was naughty yesterday, I didn't listen to my mom, and that's why I'm in hospital today. And we don't recognize that. And as Jan said, it is often the parents' behavior that is impacting on how the child acts out. The classic example is you tell somebody, don't do this, and if you do it, we are not going to McDonald's. Yeah. and then 2 hours later you're in McDonald's, and then the child is thinking,
Okay.
do mom and dad really mean what they're saying, or are they serious, or is this just so some of the things are so obvious, but the parents haven't realized because they're busy, they're running around, they're trying to do their best, and things like this, you need time to think about it.
So consistency is another
Mhm.
word that stands out in terms of being consistent with what
Yeah.
you're communicating to your child and sticking to that. So the child does not get confused in what they're seeing and behaving and the behavior around them. That's great. I'm going to move on. Maybe Jan, I start with you. You used the word emotional literacy. Now, do you think parents at times actually unknowingly, I think you already touched upon this, unknowingly contribute towards an escalating situation? And what advice would you give specifically to parents to ensure that they don't go down the slippery slope?
That's a very good, very very good question, for which there is as you might imagine, not a one-time answer, panacea of answers. I think in situations like that, which become stressful, and children often test the limits of what's possible, which is again a natural biological. You see what's possible in a particular situation and see how far you can go. And if parents are continually are letting things go, then children continue to push things. So I think one of the things that I would definitely say, though, is to have very clear boundaries, which you don't deviate from. And the example we've had already about going to McDonald's is a really a classic one. If you say there is a sanction or there is a consequence to behaviour, then you have to see it through. The other thing I think sometimes happens is parents talk about things as sanctions, which are very, 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 ahead in the distance. Children live in the immediate, so the understanding of a particular context has to be about the immediate. Saying, well, if this happens in 3 days' time, this treat is not going to happen. That doesn't resonate with the child. They've no, the concept of time is too underdeveloped to understand that. they live in the immediate. So it's about being clear with those boundaries, and it's about being realistic with them. And we've already said it. It's about being consistent. And in all those situations, again, and we started off by talking emotional literacy. It's talking through with the child to understand and name and manage that emotion. So it's saying things like, you're feeling frustrated because you want this to happen and it hasn't happened, or you're feeling angry because this has just happened to you. When you're feeling angry, the way you might deal with it is and you give them strategies as an onset to that. So yes, the slippery slope is an interesting one, and what I was also going to say is sometimes it's because children are idiosyncratic, they're individual. It's sometimes, as certainly as in my years as a teacher, sometimes judging what a child was thinking or what was going to do next, even as a parent, can be quite difficult. So sometimes these things do escalate, and in those situations, it's how you take the heat out of the situation, and how you remain calm, how you remain focused, how you remain consistent with how you deal with things, that kind of brings that down. And as I said, it's about naming the emotions, naming and dealing with those emotions, and acknowledging them as reasonable, genuine, absolute emotions.
That's really helpful. Maybe let's go down one level. Let me take an example. And I know Jan, you and I have briefly spoken about this, but I'll open this to both of you. Temper and managing a child who's throwing tantrums, we've spoken very briefly about it, is a day-to-day job for parents, right? We all parents need to manage that situation fairly quickly. What tactical advice, if I could get one from each of you, would you give to imagine a scenario you have? I'll take my daughter. When she wants a chocolate, she just wants a chocolate, and she'll roll on the floor, she'll throw a fit, she'll shout, even though she can't shout, and she'll take out tears very quickly. How do you manage a child who's at that emotional stage where they think getting something is the only thing that's important to them? What can parents do? One advice that all our parents would love to hear.
You going first, Jan?
I go first. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, The first thing is not to give them a chocolate. I think that's the kind of outset of what we've said already. In those situations, I suppose, again, using language, you would talk about their feelings at that point, and then you might offer them a route out. So you might say, if you calm down, if you stop crying, and you manage to manage that, perhaps later we might talk about giving you a different kind of treat, perhaps watching a favorite program, or going for a treat, or playing with a particular toy. Not having a chocolate, but something else which would perhaps compensate for that, on the basis that they can demonstrate a regulation of that behavior. So that then becomes a different focus for that child, and then they start to self-regulate, because in their mind they're thinking, okay, if I can manage this, if I can calm down, then this nice thing will happen, which I like and I want. So I'm going to work on that so that I can get to that place and have that additional treat at some point.
Thanks, Sam. Indy, any
Yeah,
tactical suggestions?
Yeah, I don't think there is one point you can do, because it will be impossible to manage. Yeah, I mean, whenever I start off by giving advice to parents, sat on my consulting room chair, the first thing I say is, do this only if you feel strong enough. Yeah, don't make a half-hearted attempt, because it will make things worse. And me sitting here and telling you is very easy, but it is actually carrying it through that is the important bit. And the words that I stress on is, you are firm. You tell that, make it very clear whether this is happening or it's not happening. You are consistent. Yeah? So if 10 times the child shows that particular undesired behavior, then it gets the same response. Even if you do it 9 out of 10, then the child doesn't know, should I push a bit more, and then maybe mom and dad will give in, because last time they did give in once. Yeah? Both parents or the main carers for the child working together. Yeah, very often mums and dads have different views on how to manage children, which they're very well entitled to, but they need to discuss in their own bedroom as to how we are how we are going to manage this child in a sort of united way, rather than doing it differently. Yeah? Children always like choice. Like, for example, you ask your child, they need to have a shower and they need to do their homework as well, but you're giving them some choice. Would you like to do this first, or do, so that the child feels that they've got some say in it. Another very important thing, because again, in certain cultures, parents are quite critical, so you kind of shift the focus from the undesired bits to the desired. So the child has sat down and done their homework or eaten well, you praise the good bits, because otherwise the child just gets this impression that no matter what I do, my mom and dad are not happy. Don't do this, don't do that. Yeah. And one of the most important things I never forget to tell them is, if and when they decide to implement these strategies, they've got to be aware that the behavior will get worse before it gets better. Yeah. Otherwise, parents will try it for a week and two, and they say, no, it's not working. End of story. Yeah. It will get worse, but you need to hold your nerve. And over time, once the child realizes that when my dad says no, the no means no. It doesn't mean maybe. It doesn't mean if I cry for another 5 minutes, it might change.
All right. So
Yeah.
I'll probably pick up 3 words that stood out to me. One, stay strong. Things will get worse before they improve. Second, choices work. Give your kids choices to give them a sense of control. And the third, I think, Indy, you raised a very important point, a consistent approach, not just a mom, a dad, but any primary carer, right? Especially when you think about India, we have joint families. It's not just the mom and the parents, it's grandparents, it's uncles and aunties, and everyone needs to have a consistent view of how they are managing, which can be hard. What I want to do, there are a couple of things that we want to pick up, team, but there are some very pointed questions coming up on the chat. So maybe if I pick up those questions in the interest of time first. I think the first one is, and I'll bubble the question up. Thank you, Isha, for asking the question. The question is talking about, it's a competitive world out there. How do you encourage your child to not get frustrated or depressed and just keep going? Now, if I were to just bubble this question up, it's about external pressures, what the child is seeing around them, not within their home environment. How do you manage that difficult situation where things are not in your control? It's a competitive world, as Isha said. What would your advice be of how should parents react in that scenario?
Is it me going first, or is it you, Jan?
Indy, you can go first this
Indeed,
time around,
yes.
and then Jan can follow.
I think the first point I make is probably the most important, is that children are looking up to their parents as role models. Yeah. So they are going to, you know, adjust their behavior depending upon what they see their parents do. So if mom is a worrier and she's always talking about, oh, this will not happen, that will not happen, such and, you know, children will subconsciously pick up on that. Yeah. I think another thing important, which I do to my own children as well, is to say, you know, you can't be good at everything. Yeah? You can't be Usain Bolt and Tom Cruise, and we all have good and bad bits. We make use of the good bits, and work on the other. But and to an extent, life is a competition, but it doesn't mean the person who comes first in class is a very nice person. They might be arrogant, they might be rude, they might. So you know I think you sort of get the balance right, that there are more things in life than just being extremely successful and earning a lot of money.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. If I could pair up, there's a psychologist, I think it's a psychologist called Mikhaili Csikszentmihalyi, who died recently, and he wrote a very famous book called Finding Flow. And the idea of flow, it's to do with creativity, and it's a state you get in when you're being very, very creative. But within that book, there's he was interested in the idea of happiness, and in it he gives the meaning of life, which is that the meaning of life is to give your life meaning, but you define what that meaning is, and that comes from within. So very much I think about in terms of bringing up children is in calculating them the idea of your own success and your own desires in life. And some of them will be in competition with other people, of course, because you go for jobs. If you want to do a particular job, you'll be in competition with someone else. But much of it is about being the best person you can be, being the best version of yourself that it's possible to be. And I think what's been said is very pertinent to that. One of the other things which I pick up from that question is that idea of persistence and seeing things through. And one of the words we haven't used is the word resilience, which is a strong word in behavior management. And resilience is the ability to bounce back when things go wrong. And you see this with very young children. When I was a teacher, they'd be building a tower, and just as they were getting to the top of it, it would all fall down. And some children would get really upset and cry and be unhappy. Other children would say, oh, right, I just need to start again. I need to get to that point. And that's the nature of resilience. Resilience is an incredibly important element of the human condition. And we learn that through failing things, through things happening, through getting a bad test result when we're older, or through things not going the way we want them to do, or not getting the present we want, or and managing that and being stronger as a result of it. This is obviously the quote section. Friedrich Nietzsche, a famous Western philosopher, said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And what he meant by that is if you learn from it, you learn from your mistakes, you learn from your things that go wrong, you learn from your failings, that makes you a stronger person, because you can deal with things that are challenging. And that's what resilience is.
Thank you both. I know it's there is no single answer, as you all said, but it's great to have some of these tactical advice. I'll keep the questions going because the questions are flowing. So I'll move on to the next one. And Jyoti has asked a question around eating. I think she's taken an example of a child who stops eating and cries when fed. Now, how do you deduce if it's a behavior challenge or maybe psychological? And if it is either, how do you approach this scenario where somebody's just stopped eating and cries when fed? Maybe in your expertise, I'll come to you on this one.
Yeah, I think the first question you ask in a situation like this in pediatrics is, how old is the child? Yeah, because there are some parents who feed their 4-year-old, which they shouldn't be doing. And so it all depends upon the age of the child.
Mhm.
It is important to get, even when the child is not actually eating the adult meals, they should be, in their high chair around the table, watching other family members eat. It should be enjoyable. They might even sometimes play with the food, and I think parents are a bit worried that the floor might get dirty, and they'll be cleaning it up, but you just allow them to explore with it. Yeah. And almost always, the reason for poor eating habits in children is to do with just simple behavior management. As long as you've excluded other conditions like autism and things like that, but you will only realize when you implement the strategies. If you think, look, I'm really doing what I have been asked to do, and I'm consistent with it, and it's not getting better, then you need to seek advice. But if it's a bit of a hit and miss, I've had children who parents say they eat well at breakfast, and when I ask them, why do you think they eat well at breakfast but not during the day, is because when they haven't eaten during the day, they're hungry, and next morning they're ready to eat. Yeah, so they will eat when they have to. Children generally don't starve. I think that the biggest uh, block in managing eating problems in young children is, as a parent, you will be worried about your child's weight, and you will be worried about the eating. But if you worry about both, it is very difficult then to break the cycle, because imagine a situation where we are saying, you be firm with the child, look, this is available. If you want to eat it, fine. If you don't want to eat it, fine. I'll just pick it off. I'm not waiting an hour for you to finish this meal. 15, 20 minutes and the plate is off. Yeah. But then an hour or two later, if the parent starts worrying, oh, he hasn't eaten, he will, lose weight, he will this, that, and the other, then you will give in. Yeah? So I think you first got to establish, one, that there is no developmental issue like autism. And secondly, that, what is it that you want? Is it the weight or is it the eating? In the long run, as a parent and a doctor, I would say it is the eating that I would prefer to sort out than the weight, but it will not work for all parents as long as they're aware of it.
Sure. No, thanks, Indy. I'll probably move to the Jan for you for the next question. And Natrajan has raised this question: how to manage fears in children? He's given a few examples: monster under the bed, loud thunder. My daughter, she cannot be around when a pressure cooker goes off. So, how do you manage these small fears that kids demonstrate?
Well, some of those are inevitable because they are things like sudden noises or things that children don't understand, or if they have a vivid imagination and they think there is a monster under the bed. These things are inevitable. Not inevitable, but they're not uncommon. And I would say for each of those examples, there are strategies you use to support that. And some of it is that this will become easier over time. So, for instance, loud noises, if they can anticipate it, and thunder's a difficult one because you can't. It comes out suddenly. You don't know when it's going to happen. So it can make you jump. I think as adults, it makes us jump. It gives us that shot of cortisol or whatever. But we know it's only thunder. We know it's only thunder. It's not going to harm us. It makes us jump for a second, and we get this kind of fusion of chemicals. But then it will be over. I really, I'm not a child, and I really don't like loud noises, but I've got the experience of dealing with it that happens over time, and I think that's what happens. Again, I would say that it's important of using language to say it's thunder, it's not going to hurt you, it's going to make you jump, and you'll feel like this, but then it will go, and you'll be okay. It's okay to be scared of it because it's an unknown thing, but over time that will be managed. The monster under the bed one is one of the ones that one of my children suffered, sort of certainly was engaged with, and she thought there was something in the cupboard, and the cupboard used to be slightly ajar. The wardrobe used to be slightly ajar. So each night we would go, as part of our routine, we would open the cupboard, we would look inside everything, we would establish that there was no monster present, and close the wardrobe door, and then she would go to sleep. So I think the thing is I would say probably very importantly, underlying issue there is not to dismiss those, to say, oh, don't be silly, it's just thunder, or don't be silly, of course there's no monster. It's to take that because it's genuine for the child. It's a genuine emotion, a genuine feeling. And it's to go with that and to do what you can for them to try and resolve that. That's a very good question, though. And
No,
yeah.
that's and great advice as well. Something that we all should do, which is be in that thought process that the child is, right? Play with them, help them overcome the fear by not dismissing it, but by explaining, communicating to them. That's great. There are two more questions that have come up, and then there are a couple that we wanted to follow on as part of the webinar. So just picking this next one, Pradeep, thank you for asking this question. How do you help a child, I would say, improve what they're doing? So Pradeep's situation is we've tried to correct something that the child is doing the second or the third time, but then she loses interest and starts making weird faces, starts maybe not showing interest. So how do you help a child improve, right? Because of course they are not necessarily doing everything correct the first time.
I mean, I'm just wondering whether the question is about getting the child to learn something, or whether it's, your day-to-day life. Is it the behaviors or it's the learning? But I mean, to an extent, the sort of advice is the same. Your child needs a lot of encouragement. Yeah. The one thing not to do, which quite often parents are, and it again depends on the culture, your background, is to be very critical of the child. I mean, the usual tendency was, if I went home to my parents in India and said I came second in class, the first thing they want to know is who came first. Yeah. So, that kind of, that, you have to excel in everything. They need to learn that, not everybody can manage everything, but as long as you've tried to do it, you've done your best, then that's all you can do. The other issue, it's quite surprising when I say it, but I've even seen friends of mine who are professionals, calling the child, like, saying you're an idiot or you're dumb, which is again a very wrong thing to do, because the thing is, your child is not going to hate you for calling them dumb and idiot, but they might blame themselves, that if my dad is saying I am dumb, then it must mean that I am dumb. So there has to be a lot of encouragement, lot of praise, and small steps. If you're trying to teach them something, it's difficult, maybe take a break for 10-15 minutes, do something different, and then come back. You don't want them to give up on anything either, because you want them to learn that everything in life doesn't come easily. You have to work for it, but you do it in a very gentle manner rather than it being pretty aggressive, which some parents can be.
No, thank you. Makes sense. And Jan, I'll wrap the question answer section with you on this one, which is all about child's interest, right? We all see children pick things up. They have short attention spans. They move on. So how do you help child develop interest? How do you get them excited to do things and not lose interest over time? Or as those things become tough, it could be running, it could be playing football. My daughter dropped out of her class because she thought the coach was too hard to follow. So how do you keep that interest going? Thank you, Pradeep, for the question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, it builds on a little bit on the previous one, because I was thinking one of the things, as you said, children can have quite a short attention span, and the trick is to know when that's just about to go, because the minute it becomes a chore, actually it's more difficult for the child. Alongside that, one of the things we need to teach children is resilience, and that is pushing through the pain barrier of doing things that they need to require, that become difficult, become challenging. Playing a musical instrument is a really good example of that. I grew up playing the violin, and for the first couple of years of playing the violin, that you get very little reward because it sounds terrible, and it's knowing that by the end, through all that practice, it starts to sound vaguely like music rather than cats in a bag. So it's being able to see and we're back to self-regulation in a way, which is about seeing beyond the immediate. But it's also balancing that with not letting the children get so disheartened that it becomes a negative thing. So it's balancing those things. It's balancing the need to be resilient, to see things through, to to create that sort of emotional toughness that you push through the pain barrier, because that's how you get to be good at things. That's how you get to play an instrument or be good at sport or to do all things that matter. But knowing at what point you take a break, knowing at what point you step back. So it's not giving up at the first point, but knowing there's a point we can stop and we can we can step back and we can relax and we can divert something for a moment to allow the brain to filter down and to settle out, which again we know is part of the learning process.
Thank you. Thanks, Jan. Indeed, the next important topic, I'll probably come to you, and I come from India. My friends, cousins, relatives, they're all still in India. And I know in India, seeking professional help is still considered a taboo. I know you recently were in India, right? So what would you say about this situation of parents seeking professional help to manage some of the situation? And more importantly, why is professional help important?
Professional help is important, but I think it's equally important to, seek it at the right time. You know, the two things that I've learned in pediatrics from my experience over the years is whenever there is something I want to know, what is the age of the child, what is their developmental stage, and the other thing I want to know, if I'm being told this is a problem, the first thing I ask myself is, could this be normal at this age? Like for example, a 3-year-old child is overactive or hyperactive or whatever you want to call it. That doesn't mean that they've got ADHD. And that's why in this country you don't diagnose ADHD till they're about 5 or 6, because you're thinking at 3 this quite could be quite normal for children. And sometimes what happens is when parents talk to each other and they describe something and the other parent says, my child never does this, I've never seen it, then there's again an immediate feeling that there must be something wrong. It's also interesting about when you seek help. I mean, things have changed in the UK over the years that I have been here. But if many years back, if I mentioned to parents that I would like to refer your child to the child and adolescent mental health service, where they might see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, the first thing they think of is, that means my child has a mental illness, because they equate that to be, what the adult psychiatrists do. So I think you need to overcome that first, that, this is not the same thing as what the adult psychiatrists do. This is completely different. How they manage things is different. You are helping your child understand what is going on and how they can help themselves. So it is, because sometimes anxiety can get so much out of hand that you get lots of physical symptoms. And sometimes as parents, you'd rather, your child has a headache because there is a physical reason for it, rather than they have a headache because they're anxious, and that is what causes it. I think there is a need to move away from, each and everything is physical, and this, thing of seeking help. I guess in places like India, I'm not sure there are still child and adolescent mental health, like psychiatrists, but there will be psychologists who are around that they can see. And I would think sooner rather than later, after they've done the basic stuff.
All right. So what I'm hearing in is just be aware of the help that you can get, but be mindful that everything does not require you to rush to seek help. There are things that can be managed internally as well. I think there is one important question that's come up, which I would love to pick up. And this is to do with bullying, right? There are different reasons why children can be bullied. In this example, we're talking about somebody who maybe is a bit chubby, and that's the reason why that child is being bullied at school and in the society. And that needs intervention. How would you as experts advise Siri in this case to help? What would your advice be in this scenario?
I think the most important thing in situations like this is to keep the communication channels open. Yeah? Because if you initially dismiss of what your child is saying, then they're probably not going to feel, that if whatever they're feeling, whether they will share that with the parents. So, in the way you speak to them and the way you sort of model your general behavior, it should give a very clear signal to that child that if you are worried about something, You can either speak to your mom, or it doesn't matter who you speak to, whether mom or dad or a friend or a teacher or whatever, but they should be able to express themselves and, express their concerns. Then I think, you know, if there is a genuine reason, I mean, don't get me wrong, but if the child is overweight, then maybe the parents need, and if they genuinely are, then they probably need to address that as well. you know so it's not just about putting the blame on, the system. As a family, you've got to do something, and then make some changes in the system where, for example, the school has a zero tolerance for bullying. So the moment it is reported, then there is stern action taken. And if people feel confident with that, that the system is working, one would expect things to improve.
Mm, mm.
Jan, would you want to add anything?
No, absolutely. I think it's a very, very delicate area, and particularly with very, very young children, I think it requires a huge amount of sensitivity. And the only thing I would add to that, which is kind of been said, is important for that child not to blame themselves for being bullied. That being bullied is the action of other people who perhaps don't have the same sensitivity and don't understand, and this is often the case with young children when they don't have empathy fully developed. They don't understand how their actions impact on other children, and that's part of the learning process. Learning to be empathetic, which is the learned behaviour, is again a critical part of early childhood development. But it's understanding that those feelings are caused by somebody else, and you're not responsible for how other people act. That's their responsibility. You can learn to protect yourself against that, and I think as we grow into being adults, we learn strategies for doing that. But I think it's important that it's not your fault. If that doesn't happen, that can have, and I'm sure Indra would back this up, that can have very long-term consequences in terms of health and well-being and so on.
Thank you for touching on that delicate topic. There are two more questions I want to wrap this up with. I think the first one I'll go to what Payal has asked. We're all in a COVID environment, restricted movements, can't go out and about a lot. How do you keep a hyperactive child who wants to do a lot of things engaged? How do you channel their energy maybe in the right direction to not just run around, but also develop, evolve? What's your suggestion? How do you keep the child active and interested and developing?
Go on, Jan.
Oh, okay. Well, I think critical to that is finding what the child's interests are and supporting those interests, and finding ways around that where you keep them engaged and focused and keeps their concentration. I mean, we've said, and it's true, we've said, for example, in this seminar, that children have a short concentration span, and that is true to an extent. But often when children get really immersed in something they're interested in, their attention span can be longer than an adult's. It can be almost infinite. So finding what really sparks that child's interest, and that sometimes as a parent, that's quite difficult to see, and it can be something completely random or completely unexpected from where you are. So sorry, I'm going off on a slight tangent here. So one of I think the important things for bringing up very young children is to expose them to as many different interests as possible, things that you perhaps you don't share as an interest as an adult, that might be the one thing that the child ends up doing their career in. So exposing to as many different activities, as many different opportunities, many different chances to engage with different kinds of interests is a really important thing. So for that's where I would start with a child in an environment you described, and COVID has made life difficult on that. But finding something that really interests them, providing them with the right resources, materials, and support that can help focus their mind, and whatever that interest is, they are developing what we sometimes refer to as thinking skills, metacognition, cognitive processes, which, as they go further on and as they engage more deeply and more substantially with learning and knowledge, become really critical behaviours that they will need to have.
Thanks, Jan. Indy?
I just like to add, I think probably the key word is you plan the day. Yeah? Most children, especially the little children, do like routine, so you can almost predict that when you get up in the morning, you have breakfast, and after that you have a, whatever, shower, or you do this, that, and the other. So, and that's what nurseries do as well. If you sit down in a circle, that means now you're going to sing the nursery rhyme, and then you might have your lunch after that. So try and plan the day beforehand, rather than just necessarily going along with the flow and moving from one crisis to another. I think that will help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I'd absolutely agree with
Mhm.
that. And as a one-time nursery teacher myself, and having a routine provides a predictable structure for children. Sometimes you deviate from it, and that's important too. But I think that's the real element of security for children. I mean, sort of in a nurse situation, they're in a different environment, so routine is part of how you secure them and ensure they settle. But yes, for children, knowing what's going to come next, knowing what the pattern of the day is going to be, even if you deviate from it, is very, very important. I absolutely agree with that.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, I'll go to one question that is probably important as well, is the reward system. Now, there are different ways to motivate children, but what are your views as a panel on the reward system, and not getting caught in the reward system necessarily to keep the child motivated? What are both of your views on that concept?
Yeah, I think I'll let Jan go second, because I'll probably do this quickly. He'll have much more to say. Yeah. I am quite old fashioned in the way I approach. Some parents don't like me for that, but I personally think the reward system, if used, to a certain extent, is very, very helpful. You can really model your child's behavior by rewarding them for good things. But the thing, like I said, you reward the good things, but you don't keep putting too much emphasis on the undesired bits, so you ignore the undesired. As parents, if your child has sat at the table for an hour or whatever and done their homework, you just generally tend to think, well, this is what they're meant to do, so that's fine, he sat at his table. But actually saying it to the child, look, that was really good, that that you managed to do all your homework now. So focus on the good bits and try and ignore the undesired bits, as long as they're not dangerous, the undesired bits. Yep.
No, I'd absolutely echo that. Certainly, the importance of praise is a vital element in early childhood development. Children thrive on that, and it kind of raises sparks all kinds of chemical reactions which are positive. And also focusing on the positive, a positive view of behaviour, which focuses on the positive and doesn't focus too heavily on the negative. Again, they're psychologically, in terms of child development, they're very, very important. I suppose the only note of caution I'd raise in this is there comes a point where we have to make a judgment about whether a child is doing something because it's the right thing to do, or they're doing it for the reward. And I think that's a very important but difficult judgment to make, because what we want for children is we want them to have an inner morality and an inner set of values, and they do things because it's the right thing to do, not because they think they'll get something in return. I think probably I'm a bit old-fashioned in terms of that. So sometimes I think if we go overboard with rewards and we reward them for doing everything that they should be doing, I think sometimes that can unintentionally undermine their own independence. And certainly in educational terms, we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is where you're inspired by someone else to do the right thing. And intrinsic motivation is where it's within. And I would say intrinsic motivation is a much higher and much more important state to get to. I'm not saying don't have rewards. I'm not saying that, but we need to mediate and be careful with that, how we do that, so it doesn't overplay that.
Well, that's important. Have the right reward system, but don't get the child to do things for the reward. It's more about internal acknowledgement that that is how the child wants to behave, rather than the reward that's waiting at the end. On that note, thank you so much, both of you. I'm conscious you guys have other responsibilities to get to, and thank you to all the audiences as well today. It is always very educational and informative for me, and hopefully the rest of the team today, to hear your ideas, as we are all managing managing small children and helping them develop. So thank you. And thank you for taking time. We will make the recording available to everyone who couldn't be with us. But again, look forward to having many such engaging conversations in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Bye-bye.
Bye.